Hi, we're Auction Conservation, and this is the Shoot Room Sessions.
Welcome to the Shoot Room.
Pleasure to be here.
Can you tell everyone who you are and what you do?
Sure, I'm Bevis Watts and I'm Chief Exec of Triodos Bank UK.
Awesome. My favourite question in the Shoot Room, and one that we might not even get past because I know you've got a fascinating history to go through. Can you give us your sort of life and career contents page? Where did you grow up? What are the key chapters that got you to where you are today?
Well, crikey, I grew up mostly in Hampshire and son of a father from Middlesbrough, mother from Plymouth, either end of the country, so quite balanced, I think. Yeah. But I suppose the biggest inflection point that influences what I do now, well, there's two things really. I mean, my father named me after a book called Bevis, The Story of a Boy, which is written by Britain's first ever nature writer and the guy that first used the phrase wildlife in a nature context, an author called Richard Jefferies. And it's his most famous work. So I was named after the character in that book. So there's sort of some wiring and messaging about someone who was out in nature, exploring the great outdoors, and also doing the right thing by people and people less fortunate than that boy. So that was sort of part of my shaping, but then I was a student in Sweden in the mid-1990s, studying there for a year, and it was like living in the future. You know, you're living in a country that just had very high environmental standards and beyond anything we could imagine in the UK at the time. And you're living in student digs where you had chutes to separate your rubbish, which you just couldn't comprehend here at the time. I lost my father during that year. He passed away, and that was a sort of real moment of reflection for me. He was a teacher and had amazing sort of, tributes paid and loads of cards saying what an impact he'd had on his life. So I had these two things coming together, this sort of, a very reflective phase of life, living in this society that cared for the natural environment and thinking, what impact do I want to have on the world? What's my role in this sort of system? And so I became fascinated with corporate environmental management, and that's where it sort of, my career started. So I've spent, my entire life ever since sort of working on environmental and broader sustainability issues and issues of social inclusion. Yeah.
Wow. That's a fascinating start. So talk to us about education. So where was university?
I went to Swansea University, and the reason I went there is I'd never had the opportunity to go abroad during my sort of childhood and stuff, and they offered a business course with a year abroad, which is where I then went to study in Sweden. I mean, some of my peers went to the US and Canada and and the Netherlands, but all to universities where you were primarily studying business in English. So that was the opportunity because I didn't have a strong second language at the time. Yeah.
Okay, and did you come straight out of university into employment after that, or was there additional study after undergrad, or what did you?
Yeah, no, I after my undergrad, I was fortunate. I won the business prize for my year, and I was offered a scholarship to stay on and do commercially sponsored postgraduate research, and that was into the recycling and looking at recycling markets in the UK and what interventions could be made to stimulate the use of recycled materials and improve the reliability of supply and so on into different industries. So I stayed on to do a PhD and do that, and then I could have followed a lot of my peers into sort of the corporate world. Several of them went into the brewing industry, into IT, all these growth industries at the time. I suppose, it's actually a motto of the banks, but I think I'm somebody that without knowing that was a motto of the banks has kind of followed my heart and used my head.
Okay, so what was the first job coming out?
I worked for a small environmental trust that no longer exists, but it used landfill tax credits to fund environmental projects and research in South Wales. And we'd collaborated on my PhD, my academic research. So I was a sort of associate for a year, and then I went to set up a programme that we bid for European money for. So we got more than £1 million worth of European regional development funding at the time to go and basically help companies use recycled materials. And that was the biggest barrier at the time. People were starting to collect materials, local authorities were growing their curbside collection schemes, but there were no markets for it in the UK. So it was all about finding alternative markets for recycler. And that led on from there because the government within a year or two created WRAP, the Waste and Resources Action Programme, which has now become a kind of global leader in circular economy issues and so on. So I went on to work for WRAP and set up their financial mechanisms programme, which was basically trying to get banks and private sector money into a growing recycling industry. So, yeah.
How on earth does someone who's essentially setting up recycling programs end up as a chief executive of a bank?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not your typical banker, and I'm not a career banker by any means. I suppose in those days working for RAP, I first came across Triodos more than 20 years ago and thought, this is a wonderful organisation, because this is very different to what I'm experiencing. Most organisations I were talking to were just thinking, what's the return on this and what risk am I taking? Full stop. There wasn't
Is
this
that how you'd articulate the typical banker?
Yeah, that's the typical mindset of the financial industry, full stop. I mean, it's not been hardwired to think about impact. Whereas Triodos is a different kind of organisation. Was thought, impact first, and it's trying to balance impact, risk and return in everything we do. But I suppose I actually, after my time at RAP, and I'd spent 10 years, working in the recycling industry, and I've always been fascinated more broadly with sustainability in a wider sense, and also the intersection of social and environmental issues. So I went to do some voluntary work overseas for a year, and then I was coming back, and because I knew people at Triodos, they kind of said, well, there's a vacancy. If you're coming back to the UK, you should think about joining the bank. And so, that was my first life at the bank. I've had two, fortunately had two, but I spent 5 years running the lending business in the UK and Ireland at the time, and trying to...
Culturally, you've kind of spanned a few different sectors there. So from academia through to, I'm assuming the interaction of the recycling side with the waste industry was very industrial and operational in terms of the businesses you were seeing and working in, and then through to a very corporate, albeit the nicer, positive, impactful version of corporate. How would you describe your experiences of those sort of three different cultures of working?
Well, I mean, I think something that connects them all. I mean, I'm very fortunate. I've always worked with very driven people. I mean, Triodos is not a classic corporate culture at all. I think a lot of people that come in from mainstream banks or other large corporates really feel that and get a sense of that. So I think what connects them all is common. Very passionate people, driven to outcomes in all of those different things. Ultimately, what I've tried to always foster when I've been leading organisations or teams is a very human culture, because I don't think we address the external crises we face without addressing our own inward journey and learning to just share and care more as a society, and so on. So I think that's the common theme. I mean, obviously, they are very different. I mean, people are often very dismissive of the kind of voluntary sector and so on, but that has enormous potential to leverage kind of in-kind resources and mobilise people that a corporate business could only ever dream of. Part of my career was also in the Wildlife Trusts, and they, bar none, engage communities and volunteers at scale. And the one I was running was one of the largest volunteering organisations in the entire southwest of England.
So take us to that step. You beautifully segued into that. So 5 years running the lending side in UK and Ireland.
Yeah. And
then you decide, I'm going to go run a wildlife trust.
Yeah, I suppose I was kind of ready for a bit more growth myself, and I'd been a member of the Wildlife Trust ever since I'd moved to Bristol, having moved there to work for Triodos, and I just became aware there was a vacancy, but I'd seen it advertised for a second time, and I thought, well, I'm not somebody that would pretend to know huge amounts about species conservation, and I'm not an ecologist. By qualification or anything, but I've always had a fascination with the environment and conservation issues, and I've volunteered on a number of international marine conservation projects and been a survey diver and understood all sorts of different aspects. And obviously at the bank I'd financed agriculture and understood rural payments and things like that. So I spoke to them, and thankfully, I think they were looking for someone with a good commercial mindset, because the trust was not in the easiest place at the time. It had, challenging financial position, declining membership, and I was very, lucky to be part of a great team there that really turned that around in 3.5 years and left something in a much more positive state. And it was growing its land holdings again and doing some nationally needing work in nature and well-being and things like that.
And what was the intention always that you'd return to the bank? So it was, I'm going to depart for a specific period, or you had left?
No, I'd left the bank to go and be chief executive of Wildlife Trust, full stop. And I've never planned my life and career. I'm not somebody that thinks like that.
I don't think anyone does. People tend to look back and claim they had a plan and a path. But everyone who I've met who's successful, like, no, we just took the opportunities that presented themselves and tried to create opportunities as they went along.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, it's more about what felt right and where I felt I could have impact. So I went to, when I went to the bank for the first time, I thought, I've run some national advisory schemes for RAP and things. I think I can make a difference to the bank and help take it to the next level. And when I went to the Wildlife Trust, I felt, well, this is great. I can use all my commercial skills and some of my personal interests and knowledge to further that organisation. And then I went back to the bank again, I suppose because there was always some unfinished business. I spent many years trying to convince the finance industry to invest in the recycling industry. And there's one moment I've talked about, for many years, where somebody said to me, well, at the end of the day, the return on investment on a landfill site is better the faster you fill it. And so for me, this was just a mind-expanding moment of I'm working at a grassroots level, trying to affect change, trying to convince people to use recycled materials and help grow their businesses. And there's, if you follow the money, there's huge vested interests in what it's doing and so on. So there was unfinished business, and I went back to the bank to try and take the bank again to the next level and further that message, because it's not just about running a bank. We see ourselves as kind of a reference point and a force for change. So it's trying to show there is a successful alternative model, a bit like yourselves in oxygen conservation. That's why we're quite like-minded in what we're doing, and and try and then shift the dial on how everything else is happening and open minds to other possibilities. Yeah.
When so I first became aware of you as you made that move, I think, from afar, when you went from the bank to the Wildlife Trust, because sort of across the environment sector, I think it was wow, this is a big sort of transformative hire for Wildlife Trust, because most of the chief execs that were around at the time had either come from the charitable sector or directly through all the Wildlife Trusts and within the sort of industry. And I remember that being people heads up going, oh, this is exciting, this is interesting. In that way, I think you have been a sort of trendsetter, and I guess my question there is, there wasn't a role model that had done that before. And some people often say, well, if I haven't seen someone do it, I find it hard to visualize it. But the sense I get from you is you saw where you could add impact and opportunity as something to run towards. And the absence of someone doing it wasn't a problem for you. You were happy to step in and be the first to make that sort of change.
Yeah, it's very kind. What you just said, I don't think I was consciously in any way, trying to be a pioneer. I suppose what I'd always been frustrated by was the kind of separation of our economy and the natural environment. And so, when I went into the Wildlife Trust, I was partly going to lead it and help regenerate it and get it back onto a stronger financial footing. But some of the work we were doing in those days, I was also inaugural chair of the West of England Nature Partnership, and trying to advocate nationally that we needed to create this better link and understand local ecosystem services, understand the ecological networks and how everyone's actually benefiting from those. So I suppose that was the fascination. And I mean, it's why I absolutely have tried to also, champion the bank investing in nature's recovery. And there's big strategic issues we'll come on to why we've wanted to do that. But that's what I was thinking back then, and more than 10 years ago when I made that transition.
So far ahead
that's
of
what I was trying to get other people interested in as well.
It's fascinating going back to your experience in Sweden. You said it's sort of a decade ahead of its time. That's been your chapters, right? You've made those steps and changes 10 years ahead of the rest of the economy catching up, I think.
Well, I hope so. I mean, I again, it's very nice of you to say so. I think Triodos was founded more than 40 years ago, and not much changed in what the bank is setting out in trying to do. The bank has become, nearly 30 billion sort of size bank in 5 European countries, and that is something I've been very privileged to be, part of. And if you think where in the 8 years nearly I've been running the bank, where the whole debate around sustainable finance and nature related financial disclosure is the latest initiative, within all of that, it's remarkable. It's still nowhere near enough. I mean, we are still just tinkering with the financial system in the scale of change that's needed and the kind of red lines we need to put around it. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I hope I have been, somewhere in that forefront and championing, the change that we need to bring.
I think you definitely have. So take us to the bank. Take us to, for people that don't know the bank, describe the ethos, what it's about. You mentioned scale a little bit there, but give people an intro to Triodos.
Well, so Triodos is, recognised as a global pioneer in sustainable finance, and sustainable is a holistic thing, in how we look at it. It's not just about low carbon, or a particular aspect. Although the bank has been very famous for financing things like renewable energy and so on over the years. So I suppose what we do is try to firstly use customers' money to create a society that they will want to live in and thrive in. So we only use it for things that can demonstrate positive environmental, social, cultural impact. And we publish thought leadership papers on the transition themes we're working on, what we think we need to achieve in society, and so on. So, and then if you say that's what you're going to do, you have to be completely transparent. So we publish every loan and investment that we make worldwide, both from our banking business, and also we have an investment management business that invests in listed companies to try and be a sort of activist shareholder and ensure they're delivering on the environmental pledges they make and so on. So the customer's always right at the end of the day, so people can always challenge us and say, well, why are you financing this and so on. So it's primarily about what we do with the money. It's also how we run a bank, and we run a bank in a different way. So we run it in a very responsible way. We are not exposed to the kind of money markets as other banks were, so we didn't have the effects of the contagion of the financial crisis in 2008. We don't pay any performance-related bonuses at all, because we think it incentivises the wrong behaviours and incentivises the kind of mis-selling and things that you've seen in the banking industry. And then lastly, it's about how we run our business. So it's not just about where the money goes, it's trying to be a real role model and kind of best in class in all aspects of how we run our business. So, a small example of that, but the building we have in Bristol at the time when it opened more than 10 years ago was the highest, BREEAM rated building in the country at the time. The new head office, we opened our international head office in the Netherlands a few years ago, became the world's first circular economy building. It's entirely built to be deconstructed at the end of its useful life. It's primarily using wood grown in Bavarian forests in a regenerative way.
It's walking the walk, right? So, you said it. If you say you're going to be about something, you've got to do it.
Absolutely.
So many businesses have a say-do gap, and as soon as they say X and do Y, as soon as that opens, your credibility and authenticity is done, I think.
But again, but we open ourselves up to scrutiny on all of that, because again, it's not just the environmental footprint of the buildings, it's how we treat our co-workers, how we treat our customers. But our B Corp scores are 135, I think now. And we were one of the first sort of back in 2016. So we just open ourselves up to the level of scrutiny. That's just one measure of it. We do it in other ways as well, to try and sort of really demonstrate business can be done in a different way.
It's so impressive. Take us through a day in the life of a CEO of Triodos Bank. Or a day's hard, right? Week, if you want. Whatever generalisation feels most comfortable to describe.
Well, I'd love to say it's very glamorous, and I do this sort of thing a lot of the time. And it's very rare I get a chance to go and visit customers and see what we financed and so on. So it's great to do it. Obviously, that is also an important part of the job, and really understanding the realities of what the bank's doing and the kind of markets we're in, because ultimately, your job, it comes with a lot of pressures, because, I'm a Bank of England approved person, so, we're heavily regulated. So you're expected to have some knowledge of everything and oversight of what's happening across the business in terms of what's going on in the experience of our customers and, any problems that are arising there, all the sort of major developments we're making, that we're doing those in a very responsible way and very deliberate way. All the IT developments, product developments, new debit cards, which we're bringing out later this year, all those sorts of things. And then being across the kind of strategy of the bank, the financial performance, and where it is we're deploying the money, and really making sure we're doing that in a way that balances that impact, risk and return I talked about earlier. We've got to have a sort of strong asset book that can pay our customers their savings interest rates and so on. Also make sure it's got a risk profile that satisfies the regulators and make sure the bank's robust. But primarily it's delivering the impact people expect of us. And for us, that means there are a number of sectors we support that are very mature, and we've done for many years: organic farming, renewable energy, and then we do a lot of pioneering stuff, whether that lately has been rewilding and alternative sort of nature-based solutions projects, whether that's also in alternative ways of supporting people with mental health challenges and everything else. So we try and make sure we're doing some of that really transformative, pioneering stuff. Yeah.
When within your role, which are the bits that you really love the most when you get an opportunity to do that part of the job? Which are the bits that give you the most joy?
Wow, crikey! I mean, I not just me. I don't think the technical banking stuff is very important, but absolutely, I think anybody who works for Triodos, not just me, works because of the impact we seek to have as a bank. So we all take huge satisfaction when we hear about new loans and so on we've completed and they've paid out and what that's going to enable, and that's what I think also excites the customers of the bank. But I suppose it's not just about the bank in itself. As I said earlier, what I'm trying to do and what we're trying to do collectively is be a reference point for how you can run a business differently, a reference point for how a bank can be successful within this economic and financial system paradigm we currently operate in and need to change. And so I suppose, the impact we're having isn't just about within the bank, it's about the ripples we're trying to create outside of it. And that's probably what I'm most passionate about, is the ripples we're trying to create in the financial system and in people's awareness of their money, because the vast majority of people have no idea where their pension is invested. They have no idea what their ISA and current account is doing. And they have to sort of think it's not just stuck in a safe somewhere, it is being lent out by that bank, or that pension fund is using it in a certain way, and by default a large amount of it will be in fossil fuels, it will be in intensive agriculture, it will be in tobacco, it will be in all of the things that are harming this planet and harming your future. And beyond that, banks have been shown to have sort of practices that are not healthy for society. One of the things that almost went under the radar in early 2020 is some regulation was brought in to stop people being able to gamble using credit cards. But those are the kind of regulations we've had to bring in. Why on earth did we have an industry that was thinking that was good and that was okay to allow people to do? So there's all sorts of things in the system that have fueled environmental collapse and social issues.
You guys very kindly have provided a huge amount of support to Auction Conservation in terms of what we're doing and helping us scale. We think still that the work we did together represents the largest debt funding package for natural capital, certainly in the UK.
I think that's right, still, yeah.
Why on earth did you want to help us?
Well, if I start with before I come to you guys, why nature's restoration matters to the bank. I mean, it's something we've always cared about. It's why we've been wedded to biodynamic and organic farming principles for years and tried to support a number of conservation organisations, sort of, I suppose, growing what they do through helping them put renewable energy into their visitor centres or things like that. But when we looked at what net zero targets really mean for banks, if you follow the Science Based Target Initiative's guidance, it means taking responsibility for your entire portfolio of everything you finance and making sure that is net zero. So obviously we've got things that emit very significantly. Social housing, we do elderly care facilities, we have things that will inevitably emit. So it dawned on us that although we were doing these things already, we had to dramatically increase the amount we were investing in regenerative agriculture, sustainable forestry, nature-based solutions to flood management, and rewilding. And obviously we were also very conscious that climate change and climate risk, the other side of the coin, is the collapse in biodiversity and the natural environment. So therefore, the coming together of all of those things meant, many years ago now, it's more than 6 years ago, I sort of, with the team, we sponsored the first conference on natural capital investment in the UK.
I didn't realise that.
Yeah, to basically sort of try and shake the tree and say, well, are there any projects out there that are ready that we could start to work with? And we worked in partnership with DEFRA, the Environment Agency, and Esme Fairbairn Foundation to look at a portfolio of projects and try and propose some seed funding, which the first of which came to fruition, which is the Wire Natural Flood Management Project, and that's a great example of there's lots of entities who benefit from nature's restoration in reducing flood risk, whether that's insurance companies, local authorities, the Environment Agency, in terms of their future costs. So the model there is people putting money in, having a rivers trust manage the sort of, re-meandering of a river and restoring the natural environment to prevent downstream flooding. So yeah, that's where we came at it as a bank. And then when we came across you guys, you are pioneering a really different model, because rewilding and nature's recovery has really just primarily been looked at through an NGO lens and a kind of voluntary activity funded through grants and so on. And this was trying to scale a commercial model of doing this that integrates all sorts of things. Yes, some agriculture, but genuine rewilding activity, ecotourism, has huge benefits for local communities and so on around the sites as well. So that really excited us, but we were also quite cautious, to be honest. We've always been cautious. We do a huge amount of renewable energy, but we don't do renewable energy everywhere or for anyone. So we've declined to finance wind farms on intensive turkey farms and things like that in the past, So we were also really concerned about, who sits behind oxygen conservation, and then obviously when we got to know you in the history of the company and the Oxygen House Group and the background in renewable energy and education and this holistic approach, was really, we thought we were with the right people. And then lastly, Triodos' own model is not profit maximising. How we've set the bank up really from the very beginning was to allow people to buy shares and participate in the bank, but make sure those shares are held in trust by a foundation that ultimately ensures we're here to deliver the mission of the bank. And it was very clear you guys have a different model, but it's not about profit maximisation. You have to run a sustainable business. And, ironically, that's what I was doing when I ran a wildlife trust. I wanted to generate a surplus to build the reserves and keep investing in the future of the charity and the impact we wanted to have. So I don't view you're doing anything any different, but we want to ensure people aren't there for profit maximisation, and there are land blocks being put on the future of the estates, and that this is something that's going to happen in perpetuity. I think there are a lot of people kind of jumping on the carbon credits, biodiversity credits sort of bandwagons and thinking actually there's money to be made in that. And, some of those are not perhaps giving the protections for the longer term that I think you guys offer. So it's a very long-winded answer to say it mattered strategically for the bank, and then it absolutely felt like the right kind of partnership and the shared ambitions across all of those different things.
We felt the exact same way, so thank you, and thank you for the help as well. When we started looking at the potential of, it was very keen, we want to scale the natural capital economy full stop, not just our business, because I think in a world whereby we actually truly value nature and climate and the planet in every sense of the word, you need hundreds and thousands of startup companies that are trying to do their part of that sort of business ecosystem.
Yeah.
And that's only possible if you've got sort of outriders who are setting the bar, give people time and space to work within. And when we thought about, well, can we raise a debt funding package to demonstrate this is possible and give carbon credits and natural capital and rewilding as a concept, the credibility to do that? When we thought about that, the ideal partner were, of course, you guys, but there was no idea whether you'd be interested or whether it was possible to do. But and we'll come on to it. I came and spoke at an event for you, and I was so proud to be able to tell your European colleagues that you were the people we wanted because of everything you've described about the bank. It was the right fit. It was, from day one, I've always believed environmental and social impact and profit as a result of that, not the purpose. And the amount of people who've said, well, that's all well and good, Richard, but you can't say that to a bank. And in the back of my head, I'm going, I can say it to one. I can definitely say it to one. So natural capital economy in general, that's becoming the zeitgeist now, and everyone is starting to talk about it. You were there in 1990 in Sweden when you were thinking about what was going on there. What does natural capital mean to you?
Oh, well, fundamentally, and I know the term can be a bit controversial and not everyone likes it, but it's recognising the value we get from nature and take for granted for free. And so natural capital, whether it's that phrase or any other, for me, what we need to do is create a nature-connected economy. We live in this bizarre world where we have an economy and we measure the success of society in how much our GDP is growing. We don't measure it on whether we're preserving the natural resources that give us clean air and clean water and everything else. So, we've been great proponents at the bank of Kate Raworth's theory of donut economics, where we need to create an economy that lives within the planetary boundaries and natural boundaries we have for our natural resources and ecosystems, but importantly, everybody within that economy ensures their basic levels of subsistence are met. And for me, the two go hand in hand. So, people can, I think, split the things up too much, talk about natural capital and other forms of capital over here. But unless we really ensure everyone's basic needs are met, no one's going to care about the natural environment. We'll continue to exploit it. It will just be dog eat dog. So, that's partly what I said earlier, this inward journey of understanding we have to have a more cooperative, sharing, caring society, I think, as fundamental. So natural capital for me is not just ecosystem services payments. It's a much bigger concept of what we're really trying to do here and shift understanding of the natural systems we're fundamentally part of, and seeing our economy as separate to them, or nature in service of our economy is just a crazy mindset. And I'm convinced in decades to come, people will be writing books, looking back at the last sort of 50, 60 years of our history and really realising that and thinking what a crazy time. And but bizarrely, as a business student, all the things we taught around, Milton Friedman and Keynesian economics and stuff, I now kind of think, my God, the half of those textbooks are utterly worthless for the challenges that face us in society, and we have to almost rip them up and think, what are the new economic models that don't talk about externalities? That's what I was taught and was ingrained in me, externalities. Pollution to the environment's an externality of the economic model. And I always used to scratch my head and think, well, how can that be right? There is an impact there. You can't ignore it. Yeah.
It is. I think it's fascinating, the relationship we have with natural capital. So I completely agree with you. It's a holistic approach to everything. It's recognising the connectivity and the importance nature plays in everything, and that we can't externalise it. Some people still find the concept of putting a value on nature offensive. And I think, well, we've tried the reverse, and that hasn't gone very well at all, because if you don't ascribe a value to it, our economic systems prioritise and are incentivised to destroy it. And there's trillions and trillions of dollars flowing towards exploiting and destroying the environment. We've got to help push something back the other way. And if you don't recognise a value, people never will. And that's why I think it's got to come.
Yeah, and I mean, look, fundamentally, we all have to understand nature's just inherently important to us, inherently important to us, our well-being, our sanity, every aspect of our well-being, the quality of the air we breathe, food and everything else. So, all those people, and George Monbiot and others do great, work in arguing we just have to inherently value it and change our mindset and flip it. And I would totally agree with that. Equally, we will still have to have an economic system that we manage society by. And so that integration of it needs some language and some common form of language and recognition. So I don't think they're exclusive things. We have to absolutely keep championing the nature and well-being, and taking people out into nature who perhaps don't have the privilege to live in it or have access to it, and a lot of our leaders, and convince them of that. But I think they go hand in glove.
Great. So you kindly invited me to come and speak at an event for you recently, and so it was in your lovely office, boardroom, and I think I had in fact I had the last slot before dinner, right? You were going out for a team dinner after that.
I can't remember.
And I remember coming in thinking,
I'm sorry if we gave you the graveyard shift. We shouldn't have done that.
As I was walking, I was thinking, oh God, I've got the graveyard shift. And so I walked into this lovely room, see the backs of everyone, full of people in there, got a very lovely intro from your team, which was great. And I suddenly realised I'm stood between these people and their dinner. They've been in this meeting all day. But as soon as I started speaking, the response from that audience was just so humbling. It was so positive about what we were doing and the planet and the environment. It was amazing. And so thank you for that as well. And the questions were brilliant, and just the interaction was fantastic. There was colleagues of yours from across Europe there, and a lot of them grabbed me at the end and said, we need this in our country. We'd love to see it out there. So we're currently UK based. We think expansion internationally is looking like it will be sort of 2025, we think. Do you think there is demand for the sort of oxygen conservation modelling approach from across Europe, from what we've seen from your colleagues so far?
Well, from a Triodos perspective, undoubtedly, and I think even outside Triodos, it's essential that the model thrives and expands, and we see like-minded people trying to do similar things in different countries. The reason we were hosting that specific session, which was for our most senior boards, so our most senior European executive board and our supervisory board of independent non-exec directors, is because in the UK is actually further ahead than other markets. So we are more developed in sort of ecosystem services, payments thinking, and slightly more mature carbon credits market and so on. So there's there was a lot of learning that inspired them to go away, and then when they start to see proposals from other countries and so on, I think that there's a deeper understanding across the bank. So it was partly an inspiration and partly a education session to then be able to compare and contrast. And we have done things in other countries. I mean, we've actually done sustainable forestry in Germany, and we've looked at actually very alternative way of managing vineyards in Spain, and having a really sort of strong biodiversity
we
mix.
played around looking at similar as well.
Yeah, and peatland restoration. So we've done things across Europe as well, but it's more nascent. I think the kind of scale of finance that we've managed to achieve with you is unique still, and that I think in itself the scale of the investment we made with Oxygen is important, because the majority of the finance industry is not interested and kind of doesn't get out of bed unless the deal size is of a certain size.
Yeah.
And in the world of pensions is kind of 100 million investments, and they might do smaller as a bit of a favour, or to enter a new area they're interested in. But in the banking sector, a lot of the larger banks are focused on the larger ticket loans. So having a 20 million loan really wakes people up to think, actually this isn't any longer just a kind of theoretical sector. The investing in nature's recovery actually is something that's really starting to scale, and should attract the interest of all sorts of financial institutions. So we need to take an interest in this, and actually we have a responsibility to shift our existing assets in intensive agriculture and others towards this model.
I completely agree. It was so exciting because a few of your colleagues took out their phones, scrolled through their WhatsApps, and showed me conversations in other languages that they'd had with people in their industry in the country, going, look, we talked about this deal over there, this is great. And it was so surreal. It was so lovely. So jumping across to you a little bit more. So you're just, at the time of recording, you've just finished a sabbatical?
Yeah.
Talk to us about that. That must have been a fantastic experience.
Well, it was. I mean, I'm very fortunate. I work for an organisation that tries to reward long service and recognise people need to sort of, regenerate and renew after years of hard work. So if you've worked for the bank for 5 years, you can take 2 months off for 50% pay, and you can actually add holiday onto the end of that, or unpaid leave and so on, to take up to 3 months. So I took 2 months. Partly it was being opportunistic. I'd run the bank for 8 years. I'm very passionate about what I do. I give my all to it, 120%. Also, we've had quite a few challenges with Brexit, with the pandemic, with Trussonomics and the interest rate shocks of last year.
Yeah.
But our chief operating officer is retiring early in 2024. And with her retiring, I thought actually there's a window of opportunity here where I've got a strong and settled management team that are all kind of performing in their roles. So it's probably slightly harder for a chief exec to take that kind of break. But I needed to do it, and I didn't do it necessarily to go and travel the world or anything. I wanted to do some life projects. I did have a fantastic 2-week holiday because I'm a very keen scuba diver. And I'm a very guilty fire, but for years I've gone to the Canary Islands, where I know some people who run a dive centre, and dive some seagrass meadows and see angel sharks, which are critically endangered, and play with the cuttlefish and octopus, and that sorts me out. So I did do that, but it was otherwise focused on life projects and catching up with things I hadn't done, and moving house.
I was going to stop you on the seagrass, because that's important to you with another hat you wear as well.
Yeah, I mean, only recently, in the last 18 months, I suppose, I've become a trustee of Project Seagrass, which is an amazing charity that is very science-led and does world-leading scientific research to look at how we can both prevent the decline of our seagrass meadows, but also restore them and replant them. And so they ironically grew out of Swansea University, which was my own university. So there was a natural sort of connection and interest, and I'd heard about their work years ago. But we met through colleagues of WWF who invited me to go snorkeling and harvest seagrass a couple of summers ago, and then hopefully I'm adding some value to the trustee board in just helping them on a growth journey. Really, they've done extraordinary things and grown very fast to this charity of national and international significance. But myself and others on the board are just trying to support an amazing team do extraordinary work and help them grow further.
I don't doubt you're adding huge value for a second. So returning, we're recording in the start of Feb, back in the day job now. So whether it's the bank or natural capital in general, what are you most excited about for 2024?
Well, I hope that what we've achieved together is just a start, and that we do more with yourselves. We use that as a platform to engage and bring other people in the financial industry into awareness and understanding of, the possibilities and what you might actually be able to do by transitioning sort of very traditional farming and estate management models into other things. So that excites me hugely. For us also, it's about building a community of people that we inspire. So the fact we can hold up projects like Oxford Conservation, is a magnet to people who, are depressed and frustrated about where the world's at and are seeking a genuine alternative and thinking what they can do. So we try to inspire people to use their money as a positive force for good. And so, it's important we also don't have any kind of hygiene factors, that we're offering credible products and services. And we're rolling out new debit cards this year, which will be the platform for us to then offer mobile payments and so on. So I'm also excited about all the work we're doing to continue to build out the bank. And because of what that's a platform for, because it is just forever growing a movement of people that get it and want to sort of see a different kind of financial system and use money in a much more conscious and responsible way that's creating a society we all want to live in.
Which is a perfect summation of why we're so happy to be partners of you in doing that. I'd be amiss if I didn't do a big shout out to Phil, Simon and Maverick, who have been incredible supporters you could possibly hope for. So thank you so much for what you've done to help us scale conservation. And Bevis, thank you so much for coming into the shoot room. I've loved our time together, and I really appreciate you joining.
Thank you for the fire. This made my day. Best fire I've sat by for a long time.
Perfect. Thanks guys. Bye bye.